Mathias Vermeulen to join me on the stage. Mathias Vermeulen is the Public Policy Director at AWO, a law firm and consultancy that supports organizations to navigate complex new technology policy areas. He's also a fellow at the Center for Law, Science, Technology and Society at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. He worked for Mozilla, the European Parliament, the European University Institute, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and the UN Special Rapporteur on the protection of human rights while countering terrorism. Thank you, Mathias. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Maria. And I think we're slightly over time, 20 minutes. So good morning, everyone. After this masterful masterclass by Claire, I'm very happy to welcome three speakers for this panel who are all on the front lines of this relatively new field of monitoring algorithms. First, we'll hear a presentation from Nelly Pailleux, who is the co-founder and chief knowledge officer of Check First, a startup focusing on tackling disinformation. And for the crossover project, she is part of the investigative team that observes how recommendation algorithms can expose platform users in Belgium to dubious content. Next up, we'll hear from Marc Faddoul. There he is. Who is a transdisciplinary technologist and expert on recommender systems. He co-directs Tracking Exposed, a non-profit organization which investigates recommender algorithms. And finally, we'll hear from John Albert, who covers algorithmic decision-making systems in the public sphere at Algorithm Watch. And his policy and advocacy work on EU regulations, in particular the Digital Services Act, aims to ensure meaningful transparency for tech platforms that enables public scrutiny over their algorithmic decision-making systems. So, Nelly, we're going to start with you, and you have the floor for 12 minutes to talk about the crossover project.
Thank you.
Sit or stand up.
Thank you, Mathias. Can I have just the... Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here today to talk about the Crossover project, which is an EU project which monitors recommendation algorithm from 7 social media platforms. My name is Nelly Pailleux. I'm the journalist by training, doing research at Check First. We are a Finnish software and methodologies companies that provides tools to people who basically tackle disinformation every day. And we work as a tech provider for the Crossover project, together with, of course, EU Disinfolab, who doesn't need any introduction anymore, Apache, which is an investigative Dutch media outlet, and Savoir Devenir, which is a media and information literacy NGO based in France, in Paris. So the Crossover project is focusing on 7 platform recommendation algorithms, that is to say YouTube Search and Suggest, Twitter, Odyssey, Facebook, Google News, Google Search and Suggest, and Reddit Hot Topics. Basically, what you need to know about recommendation algorithm is that they are responsible for displaying both content that is already available to users, so trends that you would see on Twitter, for example, and also content that users are going to look for on the internet. For example, when you are typing a specific keyword on Google search bar or on YouTube, the algorithm is responsible for displaying the order of videos on YouTube. When we first started the project, we had to monitor this algorithm, and to monitor this algorithm, we had to collect data. To collect data, we collect data from the official APIs that were available, so the YouTube one, Google News one, Reddit one, Twitter, and CrowdTangle, which is basically the API for Facebook. But soon we reach our limit, and as we are a team composed of both developers and journalists and also researchers, we wanted to cross-check our sources. And we wonder if the official API data were corroborated by the local user experience. That is to say, are the official API data retrieving what the users are really seeing on their screen? And also, we wanted to monitor services that didn't have any API. So we developed a system with those small credit card-sized computers, actually, which are Raspberry Pis. We developed a monitoring system of small computers simulating a user behavior, and we plugged them in volunteers' home all around Belgium in every Belgian region. It enabled us to capture data the same way a user would see them. For example, if he looks on something on YouTube or on Twitter, or if he is looking for a hot topic on Reddit. And those data are available on a public dashboard, which you can find on dashboard.crossover.social, which can be used by journalists and researchers to see how recommendation algorithm works. Users can select a date, a time, a platform, among the 7 I just cited before, a data source, so either the official APIs, but also the Raspberry Pis at every location data, so we have 8 Raspberry Pis for now, and also a language, as we are doing our research focusing on Belgium, so both in French and Dutch. It enables to see, for example, the evolution of a trend on Twitter from time to time, or what video would be suggested if a user is looking for information on Russia, for example, on YouTube. To illustrate this, let's take an example, our last example it dates. So for this one, our example is going to be about Google recommendation algorithm. What you need to know is that Google recommendation algorithm is basically responsible for finishing your sentence when you are typing something on Google. And Google recommendation algorithm has no official, Google autocomplete suggestions, sorry, has no official API, which means that we are only having data from the Raspberry Pis, but which also raises the question of the transparency of the system and the accountability that comes from it. We have the chance to work with developers who are able to collect data from other data points than official APIs, but a lot of researchers are working directly from the APIs, so they can't totally work without the Google autocomplete suggestion API. It is also important to note that Google represents 86% of the desktop searches in Belgium, either on google.com or google.be in 2021, and 98.3 million visits per month in 2021, again, on Google Belgium. What we know about Google autocomplete prediction system is that it is an automated system that generates prediction that helps people save time. We only have posts on Google's blog, which are available. There is not really official documentation, so we have a really limited knowledge about Google autocomplete suggestion. Back to our example, we are at the end of February 2022. The war is started in Ukraine, and new words start to appear in the mouth of journalists, words that people never heard of before, words such as Mariupol, such as Bucha, such as Donbass. And as everyone who never heard of something before, people are going to Google those words, to type those words on Google. So for example, as we can see on the graph, in February 2022, a lot of Belgian users were looking up for the word Donbass on Google. Now the question is, what would be suggesting to this user by Google when they would type the query Donbass in Google search bar? Well, that's where the problem is. When a Belgian user would type Donbass in Google search bar, it would be automatically suggested with Insider a lot of time in the first position. For those of you who don't know, Donbass Insider is a pro-Kremlin media outlet founded in 2016 by Christelle Néant, who is accused of spreading disinformation on the situation in Donbass, and particularly during the conflict in Ukraine. We realized that French-speaking Belgian users between February and September who would query information on Google about the situation in Donbass would be suggested with Insider roughly 100% of the time they were looking for information. And it's not like if you take your phone and type Donbass, you will see there are a certain number of suggestions which are available. And it's not like the last suggestion. It's almost always in the first position. And it's the case in every Raspberry Pi, so in every province of Belgium. Donbass Insider is not the only problematic autocomplete we had when we did our research. We also, Google also recommended Donbass Insider YouTube, so it's a media outlet where they don't publish anymore. Now they go on Odyssey, for those who know Odyssey, which is defined as the GNet, as the new YouTube for far right. Donbass Insider Christelle, we can assume that it refers to Christelle Néant, who is the founder of Donbass Insider, who previously worked at Doni, which is also a pro-Kremlin press agency. And Donbass and Larbonnel is a French journalist who was also accused of spreading disinformation about the situation in Donbass. We wonder if it was the case only in Belgium, but we didn't have the time and the energy to deploy Raspberry Pis all around the world, but we used VPNs to do that, and by using VPNs, we realized that it was also the case. Donbass Insider would also appear in Portugal, in the UK, in France, and in Belgium. They would appear every time a Google user would type Donbass in Google search bar. We ask Google the question, we raise the problem, and we ask how come Donbass Insider would be recommended at the first position to Belgian users who are basically looking for information about the situation in Donbass. And Google responded to us by sharing us some blog posts that already existed on their available website and didn't answer about the situation on the recommendation of Donbass Insider. So to summarize, millions of users typing the word Donbass in Google search bar will see the recommendation Insider appearing extremely frequently as an autocomplete prediction. Donbass Insider, as I said, is a pro-Kremlin media outlet accused of spreading disinformation, lies, and propaganda on the situation in Donbass. And when Google was called out about this behavior, they responded to us by sending us to official blog posts that already existed since a long time ago. Google is not the only one to have pushed disinformation because of their recommendation algorithm. We also realized that one morning when we woke up and we looked at the Twitter trends on our small Raspberry Pis, we realized that the hashtag Nazis associated with anti-Semitic content was in every Twitter trends on our small monitoring network of computer, but we couldn't see that on the official API, so the official Twitter API didn't retrieve that. We also realized that on YouTube, when people were looking for information on Russia after the ban of Russia Today, a new stakeholder started to rise in the recommendation result, and this new stakeholder was CGTN, which is a Chinese state-controlled media outlet who basically filled the void for Russia Today's content on the war in Ukraine. I don't have time to go into deeper details on those investigations, but you can find everything on our website, crossover.social, and I'll be happy to answer any question if you have one. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nelly. And indeed, we do have time for one or two questions if there are people in the audience. Yes, I see the gentleman in the back there.
Hi, thank you for a really interesting presentation. Donbass Insider operates on 3 different languages, English, Russian, and French. Outside of those 3 language spheres, did you see them, was it only the English the English version who was popular in, or who were promoted in Portugal, or was it also the French and Russian?
As we do our monitoring on French and Dutch, the Donbass Insider, which was mostly recommended, was the one writing articles in French.
Okay. Okay.
And that's also why it's spelled Donbass with 2 S and not with 1 S like in English.
But you said that you also looked outside of Belgium. You mentioned Portugal.
Yeah, we look at the autocomplete feature when we could see what people would type. So when they would type Donbass, they would be suggested with Insider. But as we were working with VPNs, we didn't have the chance to see which one was more recommended. If in Portugal it was the French one, the English one, or the Russian one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Nelly. I think also in the interest of time, let's move to Marc right now.
Hi. So I'm Marc, from Tracking Exposed, and so the prompt for today was how to monitor algorithm, and it's lucky because it's exactly what we do at Tracking Exposed. We're a non-profit which investigate influential algorithms, in particular social media recommender systems, but not only. So I'll share a little bit about how we're doing this during these few minutes. So the crowd here is well aware about the issue. Imagine, yes. So indeed, on the internet, most content that is consumed is recommended by an algorithm. We estimate that on YouTube it's about 70%, on TikTok it's more than 90%, and so really the algorithms are the gatekeeper of the internet. Unfortunately, despite this huge influence, they are opaque and unaccountable, and also they're optimized for the platform profit, not for the user's interest, nor for society's interest. And so typically they're mostly maximizing engagement, which has a series of undesirable side effects, including the spread of disinformation, which many of us here are grappling with. And so this is a meme which I quite like because I think it captures well a problem that I think is dear to me, is that a lot of the attention is focused on content moderation, which is which content remains online and which one is taken down, while in fact what I think the crux of the problem is which content gets amplified and spread to millions of users and which content gets demoted, so basically blocked from any form of recommendation. Sometimes we call it shadow banning. And so we already know that content moderation processes are quite opaque, and anything basically that touches algorithmic promotion or demotion is even more opaque. So here I want to make a distinction between two forms of audits, which I will call cooperative audits versus adversarial audits. In cooperative auditing, the data is provided by the platform through an official access. And so this is when the platform puts up a tool on a volunteer basis, which is going to give some data. So for example, we have Tangle, which was mentioned earlier, or Twitter's API for researcher, but it remains very limited, as we have seen, and typically there is only certain types of data. You have quotas, and also you need to be approved. And so the DSA should really increase the amount of such voluntarily of such tools, which I guess then becomes more coercive cooperation, more than proper volunteer basis. But we're hoping so that we're going to see more tools like this. But in any case, they will remain for a vetted researcher, so you'll need to be approved. And which means also that you need to disclose your research question ahead of time, which obviously has also limits. And on the other hand, we have adversarial auditing, which is when the data is collected without platform consent. So this was, for example, the methodologies that were explained just before with the Raspberry Pi is exactly that. It's like we try to mimic a user. It's also what we've been doing mostly at Tracking Exposed, and it's what has been really pushing the field of algorithmic transparency over the past decade, has been mostly adversarial auditing. And so typically it's labor intensive, it requires some expertise because you need to basically sort of hack the platform, or like collect data, or like scrape it, or find like hidden APIs. And it's typically also limited to observable data. So there are certain things which you cannot observe with this type of auditing. And also, often the platform make it intentionally hard for researcher to try to do that. So what we do at Tracking Exposed is mostly building tools to enable this type of adversarial auditing. So I'll show briefly here how it looks like. This is our browser extension for TikTok. We have also we have some for other platforms as well. Basically, what it does is that it records a user session, and it's going to monitor, including like all the recommendations that are collected, and it's gonna then they're going to be passed, and it allows the user to then analyze them. And this can be installed either on a volunteer user's browser or on an automated browser controlled by a researcher. And so, for researchers to automate this sort of this experiment and make them more reproducible and easier to control, we also have this other tool called Guardoni, which allows to basically automate user behavior in a deterministic way and also collect the relevant data. So now I will give an example of how we use these tools in a concrete use case. In this case, TikTok's policy response in Russia following the war in Ukraine. So after Russia invaded Ukraine, we started monitoring what was going on the TikTok in Russia and as well as in Ukraine. Also using a network of residential IP addresses and VPN, like similarly to what was explained by Nelly. And 2 weeks into the war, we uncovered that TikTok had blocked access to 90% of all content in Russia, which was basically all the international content. And they did this without announcing it at all. And so this was sort of really mind-blowing. As you can see here on the right, you see Charli D'Amelio. Charli D'Amelio is the most popular TikToker on TikTok. I say the most popular TikToker. And if you looked at her profile from on TikTok, she had basically no view at all, and no post at all. So this was a sort of quite striking. And TikTok did this without announcing anything, and was forced to then clarify their policies. And so this was a second report that we did a few weeks after, and basically what we saw is that the Kremlin TikTok was being exploited by the propagandists, by Kremlin propagandists to sorry, losing my notes. There was a loophole that was being exploited by pro-Kremlin propagandists to upload content, despite that the platform had put up an upload ban on the platform, which was basically in contradiction with TikTok's own stated policy. And this was all made also without public disclosure. And so we are able here to quantify the reach of the pro-Kremlin propaganda that was still passing through despite the ban, that you can see here in red. And so this was the last report that we did in August. We uncovered that the content which appeared to be banned could still actually be algorithmically promoted. And this was sort of an unprecedented case of what we called shadow promotion, because like you might be familiar with what's called shadow banning, which is when content that is typically appears to be promoted on the platform. Shadow banning is when content that appears to be visible on the platform and not banned is in fact being algorithmically banned, and so you cannot find it anymore. And here what we're observing is that you had content that appeared to be still accessible. There was in fact, content that appeared to be banned. So if you go on the profile or try to access it via a direct link, it would not be accessible. While in fact we would still see it being promoted on the For You feed. So this is sort of a very striking example. which shows how difficult it is to really assess what is being promoted by the algorithm or not. And so in terms of impact, because people often ask us what this type of research can promote or not, I think the main thing is that it's raising awareness with media coverage. I think that's one of the main ways in which one can exert public pressure on the companies, which typically has been sort of moving the needle in the field. Or reports have been basically cited, taken almost word by word by 6 US senators in an official letter that was mostly based on our finding, and TikTok was forced to sort of clarify their policy and fix their implementation based on that. So if there are any representative from the Commission that would be interested in sort of opening direct channels to do that in further investigation, would be interested. And last, so I believe that, so I'm very sort of looking forward for, to come back to this comparison between cooperative audit and adversarial audit. I'm very enthusiastic for the new perspective that the DSA will open in terms of algorithmic auditing and the new tools that might come up. For example, in terms of like new APIs that will be open for researcher. Though I believe that there is still a huge lack of algorithmic scrutiny, and both approaches are very complementary. They have different scope. For example, if you're trying to monitor or investigate personalization or geographic specificities, you really need adversarial audits. There's not going to be like a magic API that's going to allow you to sort of mock to see these specificities. You really need to mock users with techniques like, for example, what has been done with the Raspberry Pis. But there's also a matter of integrity, as you were mentioning also, like, are we sure that the API gives the actual data that user will see? And so this is an example that happened on CrowdTangle, which was Facebook's sort of tool during the 2020 election, whereas the platform scrutiny was going to be particularly critical during the election, obviously, but suddenly CrowdTangle started to become less comprehensive. And there was some data that came lacking, basically, from the platform. And so Facebook said it was a bug. I mean, it was quite a timely one. But the question really is that if, for example, if China were to invade Taiwan, would we be confident to rely on TikTok's official data access to audit which content is being promoted or demoted on the topic? And I think I would rather keep using scrapers, even if it's more cumbersome, rather than using necessarily official APIs. So you can join the effort. I think for most people here in this room, there's ways in which we could collaborate. Here's a few ideas for developers. Obviously, we're really trying to put resources in common in free software repositories. So we've been working with Check First, but also like encouraging to see more of these collaborations. Also, in terms of policy, we need to have to guarantee good legal shields for this type of public interest auditing. I know that our friends from Algorithm Watch also had issues, for example, with an Instagram monitoring tool, which they were pressured into removing by Facebook. Also, funding. Sorry for the shameless plug, but of course, leads are always welcome to support a growing nonprofit. And also in terms of monitoring, you can run your own audits and contribute to this effort and to the data safe. All tools are made to be used freely, and we have some working for TikTok, YouTube, but also Facebook, Amazon, and even Pornhub, which is a very interesting one because no one looks at it, despite it's widely used because it's taboo. But I believe it's also very important. And so, yeah, come talk to me, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc, for that fascinating presentation. Again, we have time for 1 or 2 questions from people in the audience, or maybe my fellow panelists. I don't see. Oh yes, there on the first row.
Hello, my name is Julius from Deutsche Welle. We all know that algorithms are changing overnight, and maybe to both of you, how you deal with the constantly changing algorithms. And companies could say, okay, now this was in the past, but now we fixed the problem.
I mean, I think that's why we need ongoing monitoring, but also all the data that we're collecting is time-stamped, so that's an important factor. We try to do things that we could We've also been using some evidence in litigation cases, so we try to collect evidence that is valid from a forensics perspective. But then obviously platforms are always going to contest the validity, and typically they'll address the methodology, saying that it's not representative. But since it's the only thing that is available and they're not providing other forms of access, it's not, I think, a very legitimate claim. I don't know if you have anything to add.
Thank you, Mark. I don't see any other. Yes, there at the back.
Hello, Andrei Tius from Global Focus Romania. You are talking about shadow promotion and shadow demotion. To what extent do you have knowledge whether or not these are, so to speak, language sensitive? For example, in Romania, I'm usually imagining that since Facebook doesn't do such a good job of moderation, algorithmic moderation, it also doesn't do such a good job on promotion and demotion that I should be worried. But maybe I'm wrong. So to what extent do you know whether platforms are efficient in many languages rather on few languages?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely huge discrepancies in terms of the quality of moderation across languages and geographies, but also in terms of the policies. So what we've seen here, the example I was giving about Russia, this behavior was only seen on the Russian TikTok. If you would see on other platforms, it was different. And in fact, I mean, it was not very funny, but like the Russia Today, for example, was blocked in Europe and visible in Russia, so the TikTok. And while any other form of like Western media was visible from Europe, but not from Russia, so you really had some form of unprecedented splinternet on a social media platform, where you'd really see basically completely different availabilities based on their geographies. And when it comes to content moderation, you also have obviously different means invested in different languages.
Thank you, Mark. I think now it's time to go to John as our final speaker.
Thank you, Matthias. Thanks, EU to SinfoLab for inviting me to speak here, and to my fellow speakers for setting me up quite nicely. This is kind of variations on a theme that we're doing here. Putting algorithmic audits into practice is just another way of saying the title of our session here. And I think the work you're doing is really state-of-the-art in terms of monitoring recommender systems under the status quo that we have. And as you said, Mark, will continue, adversarial audits will continue to be important, even in the new regulatory environment that we're looking forward to with the Digital Services Act and also with the Code of Practice on Disinformation, which has a lot to say about independent research and supporting researchers, and something I'll get into in my presentation here. I think you also laid the groundwork at sort of the top level framing right, in the sense that, and I think we're all in agreement here, that we can't simply trust platforms to tell us what's going on in their services and how they're dealing with it. We need external scrutiny, and we need to sort of protect and promote this, the ability for independent researchers to do this kind of work. So we'll get into the presentation, and I forgot to get the clicker from you, so maybe you could hand it to me, Mark. Advance. Okay, so first I'm just going to talk about Algorithm Watch's own experience monitoring recommender systems through our Instagram project, which was a data donation project. And Algorithm Watch, Matthias gave the introduction here. We're a nonprofit research and watchdog organization. We're based in Berlin. We have a sister organization in Switzerland. I myself am in Berlin. And monitoring algorithms is sort of one of our key priorities, especially on my end, on the policy and advocacy side, where I'm focused on the public sphere. So, our Instagram monitoring project, we launched this project in 2020, and we and our media partners had various research questions that we pursued over the course of this study. For example, does Instagram prioritize content from certain political groups? Does it prioritize content showing partial nudity? Very different research questions, as you can see, but both certainly important and with implications, for the influence that Instagram has on the public sphere. The methodology we used was data donations and analysis. Basically, we used a browser extension that we had our volunteers install, and this basically scraped their Instagram feeds, which for the photos and videos that they were seeing in their feeds from particular, and we were following particular accounts that we asked our volunteers to follow. Nice, I'm not using my notes. So our findings, we shared our data with data journalists from the Süddeutsche Zeitung in Germany, who found that the AfD, or the Alternative für Deutschland, which is the far-right political party in Germany, was showing up higher on average in the feeds of our volunteers than content from other political groups. We also found in our own study from influencer posts on Instagram that posts that showing more skin, more nudity, was basically showing up higher in the feeds of our volunteers. And I don't have a slide to say this, but I think it's important to clarify that I'm not trying to imply here that Instagram favors far-right political content or is trying to somehow prod its users into posting racier photos on the platform. Not at all. This is just what we're seeing in the feeds of our volunteers. This is what we're able to capture using this methodology. And we would need more comprehensive data access in order to be able to understand why this is happening on the platform. And this is exactly what we've been advocating for. So Marc pointed or referenced our experience with Facebook. Basically, after we've been doing our Instagram monitoring project for over a year, I should say that when we first published our findings, we reached out to Facebook for comment, and they basically said that our methodology was flawed and didn't care to detail specifics of why. But in any case, we continued to use this browser extension to conduct our research over the course of a year. Over 1,000 people installed the browser extension. And then after we'd been running this about a year, summer of 2021, we got a sort of unpleasant surprise, which was a communication from Facebook asking for a meeting, in which they basically told us that our project was violating their terms of service, which forbids the automated collection of data. And they also said that we violated the GDPR, which we dispute. I think if you look at the source code that we used, which we've open sourced, you can see that we conducted this in a way that was protecting the privacy of the personal data of our volunteers. 5 minutes. Good to know. Thanks, Matthias. So Facebook's response here was basically to threaten us. Well, I'm saying that quite brazenly, but they said, I think this is quoting exactly, that if we didn't resolve the issue in their terms, that they would have to resort to more formal engagement. And we plainly took this as a threat of legal action, which as a small NGO, we have no ability to go to court with a behemoth like Facebook. So our response was to terminate the project. We did come public with this story after Facebook shut down the user accounts of NYU Ad Observatory researchers, because we wanted to show that this wasn't just something happening in the US. I mean, that was covered quite widely. We wanted to say this is happening in Europe as well. And we basically tied our story to a very specific demand, which was that in the Digital Services Act and in EU regulations more broadly, we need to have legally mandated data access and protections, a shield, as Marc said, for public interest researchers who are doing these kinds of adversarial audits as well. So the Digital Services Act, because I now probably have 3 minutes left, and I know we have a masterclass coming up from Rita in the next session, which is really going to get into the DSA. I'm going to race through this, but basically we have an innovation in the DSA, which is that we have data access for regulators, as well as independent auditors and vetted researchers. And that the real difference here from the status quo is that regulators and not platforms will be vetting the researchers. And in a kind of visualization, what this looks like, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but essentially it lays out a procedure for who can be a vetted researcher, who is the authority that is vetting them, under what conditions can platforms seek to amend these data access requests, and ultimately, the purpose is to facilitate data access for these specific research demands that, as Marc said, again, that has to be laid out beforehand, right, what you're asking for, yeah, which is a challenge, and it's something that I think researchers are all really engaged in right now as they sort of try to gear up for these data access requests. It's like, okay, how do we conceptualize, operationalize what a systemic risk is, which is what they're allowed to study under this regime. I'm also going to talk briefly about the Code of Practice on Disinformation, which has been coming up in the conference over the past couple days, and major platforms have signed on to it. It's a co-regulatory instrument with the DSA, and it includes these semi-voluntary commitments, let's say, there's an entire section which is all about supporting public interest research, empowering research, in fact. And in the Code of Practice, these commitments include not taking adversarial action against good faith research, which is something we're obviously very attentive to given our firsthand experience with Facebook. Also, and this is interesting, to develop and fund and work with an independent third party body, an intermediary essentially, to help in facilitating data access requests. And this is something that basically, if you look back at this graphic, which is a work in progress, and Mathias, who's quite the expert on this, maybe could split hairs with me on it, and forgive me for cutting corners on the details. In any case, this independent third party could be thought of as kind of like a missing puzzle piece, or one aspect of what needs to get sorted out by the Commission and delegated acts, also by the platforms themselves, which have made this similar commitment in the EU, the Code of Practice on Disinformation. And this also comports with recommendations that we've made for a third-party intermediary in our Governing Platforms project, also work that Mathias has done with EDMO. I have a minute left, so finally I'll end on this crowd tangle provision, which is in the Code of Practice on Disinformation. And again, crowd tangle has been coming up a lot, and we've been talking about how it's not exactly the gold standard, but you work with what you've got, and this is basically what researchers have been relying on to report on disinformation on Facebook and Instagram. But basically, despite this commitment, which is in the Code of Practice for platforms to develop a kind of a crowd tangle, and Facebook already has crowd tangle, you would think they would be investing more in this resource, which other platforms like TikTok are expected to provide. But instead, we see exactly the opposite, that the tool is being gutted, that it's been unreliable. The crowd tangle team was disbanded last year. And so I think this really illustrates kind of the unevenness of platforms and sort of their commitments to transparency that they make, but then their actions sometimes tell us otherwise. So I think basically I use this example to reiterate that there's really a need for legal and procedural clarity here, which is coming down the pike in terms of how data access is going to work. Not only these cooperative audits which are provided by the DSA, but also these, how to encourage auditing of recommender systems, and also research that uses tools that allow researchers to use publicly available data like CrowdTangle. And to try to land the plane here, again, I think is just a need for us collectively as a community, and it's great to be here, and I hope to meet some more of you today to be engaged in this work and to really make sure that we stay vigilant. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John. I think we have time for one more question. I'm looking at Maria here. Yes, one more question. Claire in the back there.
these different initiatives. So this is actually a question for everyone, but if we just have time for John to take it, it follows his point about the community. I'd love to hear you reflect on the state of the kind of public interest algorithmic auditing community, how you see your collaborations now, and how you think you could be collaborating more, whether that's through advocacy, legal defense, or even technically in terms of your data sets, using open source, etc.
Yeah, does this work? I can tell you just from my experience, the feeling is that we're gearing up. We have this blueprint in place that's been provided by the DSA, but there's a lot that still needs to be figured out. And in the meantime, researchers who want to do this work, who are looking forward to this kind of data access, but at the same time are trying to take advantage of these commitments in the code of practice and the sort of possible scope for research. We're sitting down, we're taking meetings to basically, I was in a workshop, for example, about how to operationalize systemic risks. And it was fascinating. We spent 3 hours, the conversation was wide-ranging, and we went through case studies trying to essentially come up with, okay, well, what could a research proposal look like? And my group, for example, took the climate change as a sort of an issue, a broad issue to look at. And it was amazing how difficult it was to try to tie this thing, which is clearly a risk to society, but to tie climate change to specific harms or specific things on social media that we would be able to audit, because climate change disinformation is obviously a very complex topic. So yes, I would, in answer to your question, I would say this work is happening, and it's challenging work, but it's work that needs to be done.
I think on that positive note, if Marc and Nelly don't have any extra thoughts, floor is yours. I think now, Maria, to guide us to lunch.
Thank you. Yes, very important announcement. We are now adjourning for lunch, and we will meet here in a little less than an hour